This Fleet Equipment Unscripted interview is presented by Hendrickson, a leading manufacturer of heavy-duty suspension systems and components to the global commercial transportation industry. Visit hendrickson-intl.com to learn more.
Hey everyone, Jason Morgan, editor of Fleet Equipment, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today we're talking with Ben Wiesen, president of Carrier Logistics. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, my pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a conversation.
Yeah, so we're talking about a subject that I am a big fan of. I know some people can get a little a little much on the cybersecurity. We're all on our phones. Trucks are connected, drivers are connected, fleets are connected. And really, it seems like cybersecurity is almost everybody's responsibility on some level these days. So happy to connect with here and give our fleets a little insight into what they can do to protect their drivers, the people they work with, and their trucks for sure. So if we could just kick it off and give me the biggest cybersecurity threats that businesses face today, and are there any specific to fleet operators that we might want to highlight?
Okay, well, cybersecurity is absolutely something that's not only on my mind, but I think on everyone's mind, both in transportation logistics and across the business landscape. If I'm going to think about the threats that we face, I'd probably break them down into maybe 4 categories. And the first category is just plain and simple system failure. This is just when something doesn't work. Network that stops or degrades, a physical server that just isn't doing what it's supposed to do, an application that has an error. It doesn't mean that there was a third party. It doesn't mean there was a bad actor. It's just life. But it is a threat to business continuity. And as we rely more and more each day on systems, I think it's a part of being prepared for cyber events, and it's part of cybersecurity that sometimes people don't think about as much as they should. So that's why I'm calling that one out first, because it's inside your own 4 walls. It's under your control, but sometimes people forget about taking control of that part of their system. Second main category that I would talk about will fall under a category I'll call malicious activity. And this might be what some of us think about when we think in the old days about, quote, the hackers. And malicious activity is where someone, at least my definition of this, is where someone is purposefully attempting to interfere with your computer systems to cause some sort of functional harm, but maybe not expressly for the purpose of financial gain. Someone who hacks into your website and posts something on your website that maybe you don't want there would be an example of malicious activity, but it wasn't really for financial gain. It was either a revenge act, a disgruntled employee or ex-staff member, or just someone who wants to exercise their cyber hacking skills. But it's something we do need to be concerned with.
Right.
Category 3, getting more in the realm of monetary risk, is cybersecurity issues that fall into a theft or an embezzlement category. So this would be theft of intellectual property, someone stealing a customer list, sales data, employee data. Also using computers to transfer funds illicitly, to cause a deposit to a third-party bank account that shouldn't have happened. So that's the third category. And then the last category that I would describe is the one that we've been hearing the most about in the news lately, and that's ransom/ransomware. Well, that's a targeted attack, and it doesn't mean that your business is the one that's been targeting people. The bad actors cast very, very wide nets, so don't feel so special just because you've been caught in the net. They're casting very wide nets, and if they can reel one in, they reel one in. But it's an attack where the victim is forced to make a decision between paying a ransom, paying money to retain control of their systems, or having data loss and suffering the consequences of inoperable systems. You asked for relevance specifically to fleets and fleet owners.
Right.
And I don't know that the fleet owners will be happy to hear my message, but my message is I think that fleet operations have to be particularly concerned with cybersecurity and particularly concerned with all 4 categories. when you think about the nature of trucking operations, they're geographically dispersed. It's much harder to stay on top of things when they're all over the country, all over the continent, all over the world.
Right.
The larger the network, I think the greater the likelihood something fails, if we're just talking about category 1 system failure. The more components on a truck, I'll try and make it very physical, the more components on a truck, the more likely one of the components fails. So same thing with computer systems. One can have incredible defenses against an attack and still have an internal failure. And when you look at the sheer number of systems that fleets deploy, the vast number of places where these systems are installed, it makes trucking particularly vulnerable to system failure. And think about components in your systems. I'm talking directly to the fleet owners right now. Think about your communication links, and they may be operating on different networks, different hardware, different phones, different tablets, different hardwired devices. Think about what's happening in your dispatch centers and in your offices, different PCs, different levels of operating systems, different pieces of software. Think about your trucks, different models, different years, different OEMs. There's a lot of parts. Every single one of them is vulnerable to attack, to failure. And if you have such a large inventory of systems, do you even have control over that inventory of systems? Does anyone in your organization really know what's deployed out there? And if you don't know what's deployed out there, how do you know what to take charge of and take care of and maintain? So there are big questions and big concerns, specifically for logistics and for fleets, that by the nature of their business, running 24/7 make them even more vulnerable. So we talked about already the geographic dispersion, the large number of components and systems. What does it mean to run 24/7? Well, if you're running 24/7, then you're reliant on your systems 24/7. That means you can't literally afford downtime ever, because you're running 24/7, you're running all the time. So what are you going to do if you have downtime? Can you afford to have people monitoring your systems 24/7, even though they're running 24/7, monitoring, having management, technical management 24/7? That's a big commitment.
Right.
And what do you do to train staff working in the wee hours of the morning who might not be engaged in your business meetings, in your everyday communications? They're running sort of on an island on their own, keeping things working at night. How do you get them trained? How do they learn to recognize and avoid phishing attacks? It's complicated. It's a very perishable commodity that you're selling, right? Space on a truck. Once time has gone by, just like a hotel room that went empty, you can't sell that bed the next night. An airline can't sell their seat the next day. And you can't sell your space in the trailer the next day. So 24/7 means not, I hope it works. It has to work. It has to be up, or you haven't deferred revenue. You've lost the opportunity to gain revenue. And it is that important. Cybersecurity and system uptime is pivotal to the bottom line.
Right. And one of the examples we've talked a lot about recently, ones that fleet managers can plan for, because I'm glad you mentioned the system stability and not having any downtime there, because we do know the 3G sunset is coming up. That's a great example of plan for your telematics devices ahead of time, get them in and updated while you're doing your preventative maintenance, so that you just don't wake up one day and can't see your trucks on the telematics side. You talked, the back half was really about security, and you highlighted that, yeah, there's a lot going on here, right? And it can be really intimidating. And from a fleet manager point of view, they're thinking, okay, well, I've got to keep the equipment running, so I'll stay on top of the telematics hardware. But outside of that, it does speak to kind of a holistic company strategy and some bullet points there. So can you boil that down a little bit as to what are the best lines of cybersecurity defense on the kind of the bird's eye view, and then from the fleet manager point, like, what do I need to look out for when it comes to my trucks and it comes to my drivers? What specifically do I need to know and act on?
Yeah, glad to get that question, because it's one thing to be scared, but it's another thing to act on that fear. And that's really the purpose of these conversations. When someone takes time to watch this video, I don't think they're watching it because they have a fascination in horror shows. It's because they want to know what can they take home and bring back to their business to reduce risk or be better prepared. So let's talk about those lines of defense. There's no I in team. I think we've all heard that growing up, there's no I in team, and a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And the reality is we're all human. And as employees, we're put in very difficult situations. Think about what your staff is taught. The customer is always right. Keep the customer happy. Take care of the customer. And at the same time, we're each conditioned to do what our boss asks us to do. So how can we be surprised when a human engineered attack, such as a fake email from a customer that says, you have to help me read this document with an attachment, or a text from your boss that says, reply ASAP, we need to transfer money to a new account. How can we be surprised when these human factor engineered attacks are successful into tricking people to do things that afterwards they wish they hadn't? So what do I recommend? I recommend a multi-pronged approach towards hardening your system components, and to think of those components as both human and computer. So the best lines of defense will include the following. First, let's talk about technology. And I'm not going to go into acronyms and anything super technical. I want this to be practical advice that anyone can bring back to their office. Cyber concerns are by definition system-centric concerns. And paradoxically, technology can give you some of the best protections against those concerns. Just as you probably lock your car and lock your home, you need to have locks on all of your systems. Firewalls, antivirus, enforced password policies, carefully thought out rules about who can access which data and when. These are the ABCs of cyber defense. And not any one of those things is impossible or too hard or too expensive, but it is definitely urgent. It is urgent that we pay attention to those things and that we implement the ABCs of cybersecurity. Just as you do a pre and post inspection on each tractor and trailer, you have to legally, right? As each load moves.
Right.
Are you inspecting your computer components? Are you making sure that they're fully maintained? Are they patched to appropriate levels? Documented, backed up? How are you storing your data? Does your database contain banking information, credit card numbers, personnel records? And if so, how do you control that data? And how do you know when that data is accessed? So I would put all that, categorize all of that into a technology line of defense. Right. Moving along, I'd say continuing education is the next layer of defense. Education regarding the risks that each employee, each staff member faces in terms of malware, in terms of phishing, and what actions represent potential risks. What are things that are risky behavior and what's perfectly normal and safe? We teach defensive driving. We teach self-defense. We need to teach cyber defense. Right. Finally, let's talk about culture. And fleets need to spend as much time inculcating and developing a culture of system security and computer security as they have developing a culture of driver and warehouse safety. It's not practical to say it's flavor of the month. If it's flavor of the month, then next month it's gone. It has to be a systemic, well thought out, and maintained cultural process in order to make your staff, I'll make it up a term, cyber aware and cyber savvy. Mm-hmm. Every trucking company would tell you, every trucker would tell you it's unfathomable to think about driving recklessly down a highway just to get a load there on time, right? No one would ever accept that risk. How many of those same people have a sticky note next to their monitor with a password? We have to develop a culture that believes in computer safety just as seriously as it believes in driver and warehouse personnel safety.
Right. No, for sure. And I mean, and I've heard it before, and you mentioned it here too, that often the human component is the weakest link in the security chain, right? You mentioned the passwords, not to mention easily guessed passwords, shared passwords, that kind of thing. And I have to admit that even I've been subject to it where, you point out, you get an email, it says it's from your boss or the company owner or a client or something, and it just has some, a line there that you have to respond to. They're getting more diagnostic information through email now, more notifications. Attachments are common, right? It happens. And you do kick yourself after you respond to it or open a link and go, oh, but I shouldn't have done that, right? When that does happen, right? And let's just assume, okay, give everybody a pass. It's going to happen to someone, if not you in your organization. What happens next? What's the path toward recovery of the systems and data, and what can you do to protect yourself going forward?
I'm going to answer that. I'm also going to give one more piece of advice since we're talking about lines of defense before we move on to something got through my defense. So my one more piece of business process that I would encourage people to think about is their providers. And everyone has third-party providers who help with something, whether they're helping with human resources, whether they're helping with risk management, whether they're helping directly with computer systems, they're third-party providers. And I read literally today that there was a cyber breach that happened at a healthcare provider, Tyler-Made Diagnostics. And it so happened that healthcare provider maintained employee records, including driver certifications, for several very prominent trucking and logistics companies. And not clear is there inherent liability as a result of that breach that's going to come back to the fleets. But the point is, as careful as we are to choose what contracts we enter into, we look at the capabilities of the vendor, we look at the price. We need to also look at their computer capabilities and their commitment to security, and probably start writing those things into our contracts with third-party providers. And I think that helps sort of round out some of the lines of defenses, because we can look inside our own four walls, but we also have to look outside our four walls to the people who help us transact business.
Well, and it's a good point I want to highlight before we move on to that I didn't think of before that. I always think of, well, it's my data. I got to secure my data, my data, my data. But for a logistics company that works with a lot of clients, right? A carrier that's providing a lot of client service, moving their goods, lots of contracts, very specific there. You want to protect your clients' data too, right? And that can almost seem more important, especially in the business world where you're working for those relationships, maintaining it. Sometimes it can be easy to put off the stuff I need to do, right? But if you also put in the context of this is for your customer safety too, that's the last thing you want is someone to breach your data and then also get your customers' data and have to make that phone call. That does not.
Well, that's right. Because even if I'm not actually liable according to the court of law, there's still going to be loss of goodwill, loss of trust. It's not a situation I'd like to find myself in, for sure.
For sure. Okay, so let's look at recovery then. What are my go-to bullet points here?
All right, so definitely I think, and I'm sorry to say that for most individuals and companies, it's probably not a question of will I have a cybersecurity event. It's a question of when will I have a cybersecurity event. And so armed with the knowledge that it's a real threat. It's something that people are trying to exploit, and systems always break. Right? It's a real threat. It's incumbent upon all of us to do something about that, to build up our lines of defense, but also to have a plan for recovery should something happen. So here are some things. First, one of the big threats today is ransomware. Agree ahead of time with your stakeholders, with your board of directors, with your management team. What is your approach to ransomware? I wouldn't share it with anyone, right? This is internal and private, but you need to know yourself. What is your approach to ransomware? Are you prepared to negotiate and potentially pay a ransom? Are you prepared to incur extensive downtime and lost business because you refuse to pay an extortion? I'm not saying which is right and which is wrong. I don't know that there is a right or wrong. It's very gray.
Right.
But if you're only starting to think about it, once you're already in the crosshairs of the attack, it's too late. So be prepared ahead of time. Regardless of your personal philosophy on it and the corporate decisions that you make ahead of time, make sure you have the wherewithal to execute that plan. Consider that cyber risk insurance policies are no longer something that's nice to have. It's cost of doing business. You have to have it. That's a policy that will help pay the expenses that you incur should you be attacked. If it's decided to pay a ransom, might help cover the cost of the ransom, and if the recovery efforts will help pay for the recovery efforts and give you instant access to the professionals who know how to do it. So I would consider that a cost of doing business these days, and not something to think about next year, but something to think about now.
Right.
Another really important tool to ensure you're able to recover and to make sure you have options is to understand your backups. You need to ask ahead of time, can my backups be restored? Are the backup and restore procedures documented? And are they documented correctly? Are they current? Just like a home safe is insufficient to save your most important documents, right? If your home goes up in flames, probably whatever's in that safe is going to eventually burn as well, even if it has an hour of fire protection. A backup could be useless if it's inside the same network that's been compromised. So you also have to ask, where are your backups kept? Will they be accessible, God forbid, should you need them? And the last thought I have is really, again, be prepared today for the possible event of tomorrow. Think about how will you communicate? How will you communicate internally to your team if your network's inaccessible, if you have to shut everything down? How will you communicate to customers? How will you get the word out to continue moving forward and not make the cyber event a final event in your business? So those are some thoughts I have.
No, and very good. And you know, just to also stress that, you know, from the fleet manager side of people that are focused on making sure the trucks are running, they're dealing with maintenance issues, they're dealing with logistics issues. You know, even just talking about it with the others you work with, both internally and externally, specifically your service and technology partners, right? Making sure that the securitors are there, the support is there, anything that you're doing from the truck equipment standpoint that can help in that regard, and staying on top of those training best practices for sure. You drew the parallel to physical security, and that is something fleets are well aware of in terms of truck, trailer, equipment, that kind of thing. Should be treated in the same regard here for sure.
Absolutely.
Ben, it's been great talking with you. A lot of great insight there that I think everybody could benefit from. I'm sure I will be talking to you again soon.
Look forward to it. Have a great day.